by way of introduction, I'm going to be speaking with Maysoon Pachachi, a filmmaker, Iraqi, the British Iraqi living in London, who directed and co-wrote and produced the film that we watched this evening, Our River, Our Sky. So I'm so delighted to have this conversation with you about your beautiful and important film, Our River, Our Sky. And I wanted to begin by putting the film into just a little bit of context. So as we're well aware, 20 years ago, on March 19th, the United States-led multinational forces invaded Iraq. And this was a politically calculated decision to use firepower of the most powerful militaries in the world to forcibly remove Saddam Hussein from power. President George Bush and his cronies made promises to deliver democracy to Iraq as if Iraqi people themselves should have nothing to do with the political change. A new regime was imposed on Iraq by the Coalition Provisional Authority, led by Paul Bremer, and an American diplomat and the architect of the devastating de-Baathification policies in Iraq. All of this resulted in a political order based on sectarian quotas and the occupation of Iraq, creating and enabling horrendous forms of violence against the Iraqi people. Amidst all of this, amidst all of the death and the devastation, of course, Iraqis have been living and enduring and making decisions about what comes next. Maysoon, you have been making documentaries about people living their lives under extraordinary circumstances for 30 years. You've made films in Palestine, Egypt, and Iran, but most recently, your films have centered on Iraq, where your family comes from. And you've directed and produced 3 documentaries: Iraqi Women Voices from Exile, Return to the Land of Wonders, and Open Shutters, Our Feelings Took the Pictures. And you co-founded the Independent Film and Television College, a free-of-charge film training center in Baghdad in 2004. So with this incredible wealth of experience and dedication to telling stories, this is your first narrative film. And after a well-established career as a documentary filmmaker, I would love to hear how and where this fictional project about ordinary people living in Baghdad began for you.
As part of a women's group in London, made up of Iraqi women living here and non-Iraqi women, and we called Act Together. And we were campaigning against sanctions, very brutal sanctions for 13 years, and against the war. And we were very much in contact with people in Iraq at that time, in women's groups and otherwise. And also the film school that I founded, Film Training Center, really, with my colleague, Qasim Abed, who's another London-based Iraqi filmmaker. We were very much in touch with these students and what was going on in their lives. And so I was collecting stories, which is a sort of obsession, and sort of talking to people, and then hearing and seeing the pictures of what was actually going on, the kind of the explosions, the killing of people, the corpses in the street. I mean, hideous stuff. And I thought, how are people living with this? I mean, how is this possible? Irada, my co-writer, who I met on the Open Shutters project, she was a writer who was not able to write. The Sarah character is kind of based on her, I think. And she, all she could do was kind of make notes as she was going around about her business on a daily level, you know, in the grocery store, taking her daughter to school, all this kind of stuff. She would overhear little scenes happening, or see them, you know, discussions between people. She just wrote everything down. And I did a similar thing, but from a distance, from the stories I was hearing from the students and the women that we were talking to. So from that, we started to sort of generate the characters. And yeah, and then we were off. So that's how it happened, you know, that's how it happened. I was worried about doing a fiction film because I knew that it was for a start, there's a lot more bureaucracy and fundraising issues and all this sort of business. And I had been just shooting stuff myself and doing everything on the film for quite a while. So suddenly I was going to have this whole kind of structure I was going to have to deal with, and could I do it? And this was part of the problem in raising the money. It was like, you're a documentary filmmaker, what do you know about actors?
Mm.
And I thought, well, it's true, but I think I can do this. So it was a sort of leap in the dark, really.
So are there specific ways, strengths that you took from your experience in documentary that you think informed your approach to writing and directing this film?
I think the biggest influence in terms of my documentary filmmaking is that this is a collective story. And most of all the documentary films I've made are basically a collective story. I've never made a documentary about a singular person.
Mm.
And then the whole story was about them. It doesn't interest me somehow. I'm interested in groups of people, and I think we've talked about this before, but it's like, living in the city, I'm very aware of everybody around me. Sitting on a bus, there's like a lot of parallel stories going on. And the fact that you could tell parallel stories is something that I discovered in film quite early. And I thought, I can do this. And because it was a sort of how my brain works for some reason. It's sort of, while this is going on, that's going on there. And what is the relationship between these things? So in a way, my documentary films are all a bit like that. And so that impacted on this film. But the fact that it was a collective story came from my documentary work. And I think also that I started to have a kind of disinterest in telling a central story with a central character around which you might get these like decorative other pieces of other people's lives.
Mm.
And it was a hierarchy that I really didn't like. I realized it's quite late in my life. I actually don't. I mean, I love it when somebody does it well and I go to the cinema and watch it, but I don't know how to do it, and I'm not interested in doing it.
Mm.
And Irada was of the same. Irada thought the same thing, so that's what we did.
Yeah. I love the image of, when you ride a bus through the city and you sort of get a picture of the city through the sort of the coming together of people. And of course, there's a very memorable scene in your film where people are on a bus together in a difficult scenario. And I think looking at a city in the context of the occupation presents a very specific lens on how we look at urban life, right? And I think because your film takes place in a very specific time and place in Baghdad in 2006, we're getting a view of people living their lives separately, but also in a shared set of circumstances. And I'm curious how you selected the precise frame for the film in terms of its setting and the time frame for the film.
You mean 2006?
2006, the end of 2006.
End of 2006. Well, they were never in Iraq before, but once the invasion happened, then we got Al Qaeda in Iraq, which was led by a truly vicious, person, sectarian. And so they were planting, bombs, explosions, IEDs, and people were and there was no logic to it. You would get a bomb in a place, you think, well, why did he bomb a grocery store? So earlier that year, in 2006, a very important Shia shrine was exploded, was blown up by Al Qaeda in Iraq, and that was in Samarra, and it was like a touch paper. It ignited this civil war, which is what it was meant to do. And the kind of violence that was perpetrated by people was often really barbaric stuff, and people were looking at themselves in the mirror thinking, is this us? This is us? And what was happening during that time was that, Iraq was a very pluralist society. And actually, there was Shia and Sunni and Christians and Jews and all kinds of people there. But there were, there were many families, for example, in Baghdad that were mixed. The parents were of two different, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a problem, and suddenly neighborhoods became either this or that, and there were concrete walls put around neighborhoods, and so you got completely insane situations, like a family, like one of the actors in the film, for example. He's one sect, and his wife was another sect, and they had two children, and they couldn't live in the same place. They couldn't live in the same place because you couldn't have a mixture of people. And so eventually they left the country to Sweden. And so it was that sort of craziness. So that's why 2006. And I just thought to myself, how are people living with this? What is going on here? It's like the sense you got from talking to people is that the world outside them and inside them is shattering. It's like a mirror, like holding a mirror, and it falls from your hands, and it falls and it breaks into 1,000 pieces or however. Mm-hmm. If you can stick it back together again and you haven't lost any pieces, you can recreate the shape of the mirror, round, say, but it's fractured. And that's in a way what my film is like, that broken, shattered mirror, because all the stories are like shards, basically, but they add up to a mirror.
The actors in your film, they're all Iraqi, which I know is a very deliberate choice. And I'm wondering why this was important to you, and what challenges and opportunities came out of your casting decisions.
Well, first of all, not everybody was Iraqi.
Not everyone.
Sarah is Lebanese, for example. Okay. I mean, we had to sort of really grill her to learn the Iraqi accent because it's quite different.
Wow, impressive.
And at times it slips, but it's sort of, and the woman who plays Tamara, the woman who sews in her bedroom, each pocket and everything like that, she's Syrian. She was actually the wardrobe mistress, and the person that was supposed to play that role was a young woman who lived in Baghdad who I'd cast for it. It was a heavy metal guitarist. And when the day came for her to come up to Slemani, where we were shooting, to do her part, her mother phoned up and said, "I'm sorry, she can't come." And I said, "Why?" No, what's happening? And she said, "No, but we just have a situation here, and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm sorry." So, which I read to mean, her dad or her uncle or somebody didn't like the idea of her going off with a bunch of strangers, film set, or something like that. So anyway, she didn't come, but we really needed somebody, and we were in Kurdistan, and there weren't a lot of people speaking Arabic, and people the Arabs who had come to Kurdistan. I did auditions with them, and it was hopeless. There was nobody that I found. So the wardrobe mistress, this girl, said, I know this woman. I know her. I've gone through this myself. I'm from Syria. I know what's going on here, and I can do this. And I said to her, "Have you ever acted before?" She said, "Just a little bit, And she read a scene, and we thought, "Wow, okay." But we didn't have any choice. So things like that happened. So she was Syrian, so we had to add that line about, you've been here so long and you still talk with a Syrian accent. That's what that was about.
Wow.
The rest of the actors were Iraqi, yes. And some of them were from the diaspora. Somebody came from here, somebody came from Sweden. Two people came from Germany, those people. And then other people were there, absolutely there. The young boy who played Haidar, who sleepwalks and stuff, he was 15. And I had cast somebody else, and they suddenly couldn't do it, and he came, and I went with it, And what I really wanted to do was to give the opportunity to young actors in particular to be in a film that was an international co-production that, might be seen outside of the Middle East as well. But it was good. And the actors were, I mean, some were professionals. I mean, most of them were professionals, but there were quite a lot that were not.
Mm.
Like the people smuggler wasn't the guy in the car in the rain and all that. He's never acted before in his life. And
Wow.
some of the people at the checkpoints, and there were all sorts of people involved. And I liked that. I mean, I liked that it was, and that they were Iraqis. I mean, they'd lived through this stuff, so they knew it. It's sort of, that's the other thing. And it was a chance. I mean, and when I showed the film in Baghdad last year, they all came to the screening at in a mall. Big Dolby sound, cinemascope, everything. Everybody was really, really leaping up. They were so happy. They were going, "Did they see it? Did they see it in London?" I said, "Yes, they saw it." So it was. I was very happy that I did that. It's that. Yeah, I concentrated on Iraqi actors, because now in Iraq there's a sort of the beginning of what feels like a really a proper cinema culture happening. People are making films.
Mm.
At that time they weren't really quite yet. So I think there's a lot more chance for actors now than there had been.
That's great. And I mean, I know people came from everywhere on set, came together, the actors, and also I know your crew. I know it was a multilingual environment and a lot of different people from different backgrounds coming together. Can you talk a little bit about what the set was like?
Yeah, the set was, our DOP was British, spoke English, but his camera crew spoke Kurdish and Farsi,
Mm.
and his lighting crew spoke only Arabic, and the sound department was French. So it was like we had 5 different languages on this this crew, and somehow it worked. It was like magic. There was a way. I mean, the DOP in particular, Jonathan, was brilliant. I mean, he's worked in all kinds of really difficult places around the world, and he's just very open person. And I don't know, the language didn't seem to get in the way, and there were different ways of working and all of this kind of thing. And it was amazing, and it was something I really enjoyed. I mean, I really enjoyed this multilingual business that went on. It was sort of it was quite funny sometimes. It was sort of it was good because there was an incredible degree of commitment by everybody.
Mm.
Whether they were coming Iranian or French or whatever, there was a commitment. Everybody was on it, and I was so grateful for that. It made all the difference. It was extraordinary. It was really extraordinary. Everybody went to however many lengths they had to go to get something done. Everybody coming up with ideas all the time. So it was a real collaborative effort, which I loved, which was great. And it wasn't me sitting up here going, "This is the way it has to happen."
Mm. That's so beautiful.
It's great.
Yeah. And I think it's, I think it's reflected that both from the production side and within the film, there's a sort of collective spirit that is really primary. And in the film, individually, we experience characters' lives, these fragments of people living their lives in a way, like you gave that beautiful metaphor of the broken mirror. And then again, taken together, we're witnessing this larger story of a neighborhood and of the city and of a country. And so I'm wondering how you approach the script in such a way that it could both portray the individual struggle and the collective experience that you were so determined to make.
Yeah. Well, I concentrated initially on the individuals. I mean, who are the characters and stuff like that. And I think actually putting together the structure of the film was helped by the fact that I'm a film editor as well. And so you were continually having to, I realized what we were going to be doing was, moving from this scene here that we're having to another scene over there, which had nothing to do with it. But at some point we would return to this scene and the threads of this story would be picked up, kind of thing. That was the idea. It was that sort of structure, and every one of the individual stories have a trajectory. Something changes,
with all the seriousness in the film, it also carries us through moments of tenderness and laughter and lightness. And so I was hoping you could tell us about your choices to include humor in the film.
Well, to me, partly it's what I saw. I mean, Iraq became something of a joke factory during that time. I mean, I was amazed. People would call me up and say, "Oh, I've got a new one. Here's this one," and they would tell you a joke, and you'd think, how are people doing this in the middle of everything? But I realized that actually it's a form of resistance. It's a form of resistance, and it sort of belittles, in a way, horrible things that are happening. And I think it happens in many, it's like happened on the bus. I mean, that scene on the bus, which turns into humor, that's a real scene. I mean, that actually really happened. That was the dialogue. Because it's a way of survival. Because actually, if you don't make jokes and you don't laugh and you don't sing, what are you left with? Just despair, really. And I think it's a sort of courage that people find inside themselves to just resist. I will not be, damaged by this. So resist the damage that's all around them. That's what it felt very much like to me. And in some cases, and actually in the history of Iraq, I mean, where there has been a lot of violence and civilizations have risen and fallen into dust and so forth. I mean, there is a kind of resilience that people have throughout all that. People are making things. They're writing poems, they're making pictures, they're making and so forth. And that you feel that very much there when you're there. People aren't sort of sitting around thinking, what do we do now? We just do it. Sort of. So that's why. I mean, I thought it was really important to have the humor, because actually it was there.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the images in the title, Our River and Our Sky, and the importance of the river in Iraq, the two rivers, and the imagery of it and connections to it, and it's sort of as a force of a life-giving force, and also with flooding and now the withdrawal of the river level with climate change. I mean, it exposes the vulnerabilities also of living with the river. And in your cast, there's one character who's sort of the silent presence, and who is the riverboat man, and he's there as a kind of timekeeper and a protector of the city, and vulnerable as well to its elements. And I'm wondering what you see as the significance of that character and the river as well in the storytelling that you were doing about this moment and this place and these people.
Well, I think the river became, for me, the river is really important, just me personally, because my grandparents' house was on the river. And my uncle had a little motorboat and would go up and down the river. And I've never lived in a place without a river in it, and I don't think I would. I mean, the city needs to have a river in it for me. And so it was always a sort of a touch point for me. When I went back to the river, I felt in the right place. And I think it's very important. It's part of Baghdad's identity. I mean, people feel a lot, the river. They spend a lot of time on the river banks and on the bridges, and it's very important to people. And at that time, it was a place of refuge, I think, because I mean, the bombings and all of that were not happening on the river. They were happening where people, there are a lot of people, in the city, and my backstory for this character came out of the blue. I don't know, he was just there one day. And what I thought was his backstory was he lived in an area that was very violent. There was a lot of violence. And so he was stepping up over courses and everything every day. And these images began to invade his sleep. And he was having nightmares all the time of people, an eyeball hanging from a socket and all that sort of really horrible graphic stuff. So, but he worked on the river, and so finally he decided that he would leave. He would leave. He didn't want to see any of that anymore. He just couldn't take it. And he would come to the river, and he would just ferry people back and forth to the river. Except that he finds a body in it, and which happened at that time, and it's a sort of really distressing moment for him. But he deals with it, and that's it. And he's like, for me, he's like he's the witness, and he's the spirit of Baghdad, if you like, as the river is. Yeah. And the actor who plays him, Ali Karim, he's the one of the ones who lived in Berlin. And I was doing some auditions with other Iraqi actors who were in Berlin. And I did a bit with him, and he has this incredible kind of stillness. He's very warm, but he has a real stillness inside him. And I thought, this is him.
So the film leaves me with like this unsettling question of what I would do if I were in Sarah's situation. Would I leave? Would I stay? And I'm wondering if you could talk about how you consider the different possibilities of portraying this impossible decision and its consequences for a character.
Well, it's good that it's disturbing. I mean, it's really. I mean, if people are going, somebody else who saw the film said to me, I found myself asking me, what would I do in a situation like this? Not only with Sarah, but other different people. Would I hide somebody who was dangerous and endanger my life with that? Would I do it? I don't know, and that's really also what I wanted, that I wanted the characters to be real to people. And just to feel like, I'm a woman, I have a daughter that age. If I were living in this situation, what would I do? And quite a few people have said that to me, and I'm really grateful for that, because that's the point. Because actually, in war zones like Iraq was and everything, if there's empathy with them, so they're portrayed as victims. And it's a kind of abstraction. And you don't get the real person, and you don't get to put yourself in their shoes, which I think is really. So I knew she had to let her brother go, and that was going to be painful, because he was clearly going to go. I really couldn't think of another way doing it. I just thought there had to be that kind of moment where she says to him, I can't leave. And that business of it's our river, it's our sky, it's our earth. I've heard lots of people say that. People who are, I've in one of the films that I made about Iraqi women who are in exile here, I remember somebody saying to me, well, it's not my sky, it's not my earth, it's not, so I feel dislocated here. And it stuck with me. This was years ago. And also, like Irada has very much this thing. She won't leave Iraq. She likes traveling, to see Paris or to go to Berlin, whatever. But she won't simply go and live someplace else. She doesn't want to, despite everything. Because I think she, like my friend in Gaza, who said exactly the same thing. It's like, it's very difficult here, but but here, when I do something, I can make a difference. If I go someplace else, okay, I'm safe, but I probably won't make a difference to what happens there. But here, it might. And also, there's the idea of, if you're leaving, who are you leaving the country to? These people who are killing everybody, or what? The American occupation.
So it was a final question, a kind of frank question. You're obviously very committed to storytelling about Iraqis specifically. And I'm wondering what the stakes are for you in making films about Iraq today, given the broader context of what the world sees and knows of Iraqis' experiences, and specifically when you're making films as someone with Iraqi origin who doesn't live inside the country.
Well, it's a tricky situation. It's a tricky situation to be in. I mean, it's. I had to make this film. I had to. And when I showed it in Baghdad, it was interesting because people liked it, but there was a young man who raised his hand. And he said, "Were you here in 2006?" And I said, "No, I wasn't here in 2006. And actually, I've only lived about 5 years of my life, my whole life, this country." And I said, "Why did you ask that question?" He said, "Because those of us who've actually lived through it, we would probably make a different kind of film." I said, I'm sure you would. And the fact that you're a man and I'm a woman, we might make different films also. You know? But so, you know, I am that person that is a stranger everywhere I go. So it's a very, it's tricky. I mean, I can't pretend to speak for Iraqis or anything like that. But I have this access to and concern with that part of the world because it's part of my roots, and that, you know, that came after the 91 Gulf War, where, you know, it just looked like the place was being eradicated and there were no people that all this firepower was falling on. You never saw that in the media. You never saw a person speak. And that's when I decided that, you know, I was in a position to be able to do that and to talk about what's going to Iraq to these people over on this side of the bridge that I'm standing on. So that's what I've done. But it's a tricky position. It is a tricky position, especially because I didn't really live there for a great deal of time when I was younger. You know? But also, it doesn't mean that I'll just continue making films about Iraq. Maybe I'll do something else. Exactly. I'm thinking of another film, and it is about Iraq, I have to say. But it's but who knows? You know, who knows if it'll actually happen?
Will it be a narrative film, or will you return to documentary?
No, narrative. A narrative film, yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. It's very early days now, and I can't. And all this kind of follow up with this film, this present film, means that I haven't really had a chance to sit down and write anything substantial yet. But the characters are coming.
It all begins with the characters.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I'm really looking forward to whatever you're doing next, and I want to thank you so much for joining us and for your beautiful film.
Thank you, Mona. Great to be with you.
Such a different picture of Iraq than what we see, and thank you.